Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is the Ukraine War news update, the first part thereof for the 24th of May 2025. And a really big night of activity right across Ukraine and indeed to some degree Russia. But it was a huge night of strikes in Ukraine, particularly Kyiv, the capital. Let's start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find them linked in the description to the video below. 1,130 personnel lost. That's going right back up. In fact, these numbers in general have ticked up with a huge number of vehicles and fuel tanks lost. 1,130 personnel, right back above 1,000, in the middle of that range of 1,000 to 1,300. 11 tanks over the daily average. 47 troop-carrying AFVs over double the daily average. And 36 artillery systems, 1.5 times the daily average. 5 multiple launch rocket systems, an insanely high number in that category. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. We have 232 drones in there and 232 vehicles and fuel tanks. Just a really considerable number. Let's go and look at the stats from Dell, who kindly puts these together on a daily basis, looking at the general trends for the Russian losses as produced by the Ukrainian general staff. We're going to go to just the raw data to begin with, see if there are any particular records or not. No, and actually last night, a really heavy night of Russian drones. When we look at the general staff data, remember that it cuts off sort of halfway through the night, and we'll go to from halfway through the night before, and so you can get a bit of a skewed understanding of exactly what happened with regard to drones. And also, it's only drone shoot downs rather than the number of drones actually sent. And what we really want to know is the number of drones actually sent. So that needs to be taken into account. Now, when we look at tank losses, let's go to tank losses. Haven't looked at them for some time. I'm going to take off my face there. So we look, I don't know what's going on with the old magnification at the moment. No, that's not. There we go. Okay, so we've seen this trend line downwards in tanks. And in fact, recently, we have seen some pretty low numbers, a number of days of virtually no tanks being lost. And so to have a day like yesterday, that's pretty good for the Ukrainians. You can see that the gradient has dropped marginally up here to suggest that the last couple of weeks have been particularly scarce in terms of tank losses. We have the APC losses going right down as of late. So last night or yesterday's results for the Ukrainians will be good news there, as you can see a definite tailing off of the gradient of the losses, reflecting the trend line going downwards. So it's been a quieter week or two across most of the equipment. Good to see that the Ukraine. Well, I don't know. Is it right to say good to see them taking out more? Because if they're taking out more, it means the Russians are attacking more, and I think that's what we can derive probably from these stats, is the Russians being particularly active yesterday. So although it's good to see the Ukrainians have tricked the Russians, actually it suggests that the Russians are attacking the Ukrainians, and that means the Ukrainians are going to be suffering themselves. Actually, one category we could do with having a look at is the here we go, the vehicles and fuel tanks. Here we have them. Okay, so remove my face again, and you can see that this category is consistently high, and the trend line's actually been going upwards. But in the last week or so, it has been lower than we have seen it. 232 is a high number, but it's not quite the 312, the massive number we saw previously. But I think it's the second highest number that's been recorded. So that is a really significant loss stat in that category for the Russians, and it shows again that they are attacking. Or yesterday was a very big day of attacks. It could be that the weather was slightly better than it has been for the last week. I don't know. I haven't kept on top of the weather, but that can often dictate what goes on along the front lines. Now, before we get into sort of other bits and pieces and sources, it's worth noting that a Mi-8 crashed in Russia yesterday, a military Mi-8, and it was caught on camera doing so. Came down just in this settlement here, and all the crew apparently died. It was admitted by the I don't know, fighter bomber, the Russian source, gave the Eternal brothers and whatnot, Eternal Flight statement, but I've seen that from other sources potentially. So this definitely happened, caught on camera, and indeed you can see the smoke coming up from the crash there, and then their images came out of the actual the site of the crash. First footage from the crash site of the Russian military Mi-8 helicopter in Oryol region. The crew of 3 people is reported to have died, and actually that crew, by all accounts, are a fairly, I don't know if famous is the right word, they were the crew that extracted Yanukovych in 2014 from Kiev. So according to Russian sources, part of the crew, at least, of the Russian Mi-8 helicopter that crashed yesterday in the Oryol region had taken part in the 2014 extraction of pro-Russian Ukrainian President Yanukovych, flying him out of Ukraine to Russia during his escape. And they are no more. So Ukrainians will be cheering on that loss. It's not just the helicopter, of course, as I always say, it's also the experienced crew. If they are indeed experienced, and they usually are in this war. Forward command and control node of an enemy was hit, according to the General Staff. We've seen a number of command and control nodes or bunkers or buildings be taken out recently with guided glide bombs. The Ukrainians are using these Hammer AASM guided glide bombs, as well as the GBU varieties from the Americans, really effectively of late, it seems. Air Force successfully struck the 3rd Army Corps forward command and control in Bakhmut, and that's not the first time in Bakhmut either. There have been a number of nodes hit in Bakhmut over the last few months. This strike severely degrades the ability of Russia to plan and conduct operations in the Pokrovsk direction, is a claim there from Max 25 with reference, I think, to the General Staff. And here we have an AASM hammer strike on the positions of Russian drone operators. Now, the reason I'm including this because I find it's quite interesting and not at all surprising. Drone operators, I think, are becoming higher and higher value targets. We're going to talk a little bit about drones with a Times article that's just come out. And you might think that guided glide bombs would be used more on, I don't know, command and control nodes, for example, or huge troop accumulations or larger troop accumulations. Actually, drone operators, a team of drone operators, is a really significant target, I would say. And yes, there are lots of drone operators and teams operating up and down the front line, but I would say this is going to be a pretty high value target for both sides to be aiming for. So it's no surprise that guided glide bombs are being used against them. I'm including this because it's on the Kinburn Spit, or it says Spit. I presume it means the peninsula. The Spit bit is the bit at the end, just in case you are unaware or have forgotten where the Kinburn Spit is. If we go to the map of Ukraine, we're talking right down here. In fact, that is the footage. So this is indeed the Kinburn Peninsula and not the Spit. So the Kinburn Peninsula has a fair bit of infrastructure on it. The Spit here, less so. And there is activity on the Spit at times. But actually what we're talking about here is a strike on the coast of the Kinburn Peninsula. You can see that actually that's within drone distance. If we measure that out from the other side, oops, that's the, yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. That's annoyed my, oh dear. Get rid of that. Okay, clear all. Start again. You can see that that's only 10 kilometers from the other side. So the estuary of both the Bug River coming down here and Dnipro River coming out here isn't particularly a difficult challenge to overcome. So drones will be very active in the Kinburn Peninsula. as we can see from this footage. And this is also interesting because it's taking out the newly developed Black Eye. This is something that's usually put up high because it kind of needs line of sight, and it takes out the drone communication. So it's a good electronic warfare system that is becoming more and more prevalent for the Russians on the front line. Ukrainians here, whether it be with an FPV drone or a drone on a different frequency, you can see it's up in a tree up high. But yeah, on the Kinburn Spear, Ukraine's 801st Special Marine Detachment units struck and destroyed Russia's newest electronic warfare system, the Black Eye, recently adopted into service there. And you can see it is blown up by a drone. Then we hear, and I don't know if this has anything to do with strikes, could well have been Moscow was targeted yesterday and the day before. Continues to be so over this kind of, I think, is it a 4-day drone attack period where the Ukrainians have piled in loads of drones into the Russian skies. Industrial zone here on fire in Kotelniki near Moscow, but it could be a careless smoker. It could be sabotage, who knows. Right, then we're going to just have a little look at, we'll come to that a bit later, a little look at Putin's new drone war is getting deadlier, according to the Times. The claim is, well, there are a number of claims in here. One of them I'm not 100% sure about. So how Putin's new drone war is getting deadlier. Kamikaze drones that can defy jamming are killing soldiers and destroying convoys even further from the front line. Of course, this is the same for both sides. One of the claims here is that Russia has taken the lead in the drone race, outproducing Kyiv in the manufacture and use of medium-range drones and fiber optic variants that have changed the shape of the entire 1,200-kilometer front line. Now, I'm not sure that is true. It depends what they mean by medium range here. And actually, when you go on, the medium-range drones just seem to be the bog-standard FPV drones they're talking about. And I'm not sure that Russia has got the production advantage there. They might still have it in fiber optic drones, though. And that is something that they focus on in this article quite a bit. But yeah, I'm not sure about that. But either way, Russia will be trying to ramp up production massively and should not be underestimated when it comes to drones. And in fact, this article does a good job of laying out the usage of Russian drones, the threat they pose, and the scale of the destruction that is taking place. It continues, often impervious to jamming, the new generation of mass-produced medium-range Russian FPV drones, such as Molniya 1, which killed Ivan Rozhnov, it's talked about earlier in the article, in his car outside Konstantinivka town hall last Friday, and their fiber optic FPV equivalents are not only killing Ukrainian soldiers and civilians far from the front, but altering the physical makeup of the front line, the tactics of the war, and the psychology of the soldiers fighting it. They're also having a devastating impact on Ukraine's logistical ability. But it talks about medium-range drones here, but then predominantly talks about, you know, normal, fairly standard FPV drones, as you can see here. Although it does mention the Molniya, which is a drone that we've seen a number of times, and that does have a longer range than most FPVs, a 30-kilometer range approximately there, and is different because it's a sort of FPV fixed wing drone. Andrew Perpetua talked about these when they first popped up. And they're, I guess, harder to detect. They've got plywood wings, not exactly incredibly high tech, fairly simple design, and are used to pretty decent effect. But yeah, I'm just not sure that Russia definitely do have the production advantage over the Ukrainians for drones of this range. But you know, who knows? It always is the threat of propaganda and stats being massaged from either side. Until late 2023, infantrymen of both sides on standard rotation deployment were usually carried to a position near the front in armoured personnel carriers, walking the last few hundred metres on foot. So this section of the article is very interesting, and that's why I'm going to read it to you. Now, so talking about rotation and the threats, the vulnerability of troops on rotation. In fact, there is a claim that some of the issues around Pokrovsk for the Ukrainians, again, are a result of the Ukrainians doing rotations. and the Russians appear to have some of their greatest success when the Ukrainians are rotating. Now, under drone-filled skies, infantrymen are dropped off by 4x4 pickups and walk between 5 kilometers and 8 kilometers at night in meandering routes through trees to avoid detection, just to take up their positions at the front line, known as a zero point. Once there, rather than be rotated out of the front a week or two later, as was common in early 2024, Ukrainian troops now spend months in foxholes, often devoid of almost any other human contact, resupplied with water, rations and ammunition by agricultural drones. A year ago, my soldiers were on the front for a week or weeks, said the battalion commander Kuba. Now they're at the 0 point for a month or months due to the difficulties in rotating them. That requires very careful psychological support of my men and huge amounts of rest between rotation. Casualty evacuation has become a nightmare. Depending on the ferocity and topography of the sector, wounded soldiers commonly have to wait for night time for evacuation. Even then, the operation is fraught. Quote, as a word stressful doesn't even come close to describing it, said a senior logistician for the 93rd Brigade's drone crews, call sign Hashish, speaking in the basement of an abandoned house in Konstantinivka. Every mission, I think, God forbid we get a casualty and have to work out how to get them back. Responsible for resupplying the brigade's drone crews with batteries, drone frames and munitions, each night Hashish sends logistics teams in pickups to drop-off points up to 7 kilometers from the front. The team then carry the equipment forward by foot, each laden with up to 36 kilograms of equipment. And of course, if these are being spotted, then you know where your drone teams are and you hit the drone team. In the Ukrainian case, sometimes with guided glide bombs, probably the same with the Russians too, to be honest. The risk to the pickup crews performing the missions repeatedly along tracks littered with destroyed vehicles, drone fragments and ghostly webs of gossamer optic fibers hanging from trees is enormous. Quote, I get 3 driving missions at night and I never know if each one will be my last, if I'm going to make it there and back in one piece, mused Kong, 29, one of Hashish's drivers. When one of the team's vehicles was hit by a drone on the way back from a recent resupply mission, the soldier riding shotgun lost his arm. There were so many drones flying that the man could not be evacuated from the position for 5 hours. He bled to death. Hashish recalled 5 other vehicles along the sector were destroyed by drones the next day. So these corridors of drone control exist obviously for both sides. Ukraine is going to be struggling as much as Russia. Drones have affected another aspect of Ukraine's war effort, media communications. The 93rd Brigade were renowned for allowing reporters good access to report on the war from the front. Now, just as the Ukrainian army faces its own difficulties accessing troops on the front, the access for journalists has been dramatically reduced. Many media organizations have become reluctant to commit reporters into areas within 15 kilometers of the front. Ukrainian brigades have become wary, too, of the risks they expose their own troops to in taking journalists by vehicle to the front. So an interesting article there in the Times, well worth a little look if you can get the archived version and whatnot. So yeah, it looks like Russians are really, as you would expect, trying very, very hard to up their production of drones. So now we're going to go to distance strikes overnight and have a look at what the stats were initially. So we've got 176 drones and this is from the night before. So the stats didn't come out 2 nights ago until after I'd done my video. Sometimes they're a bit late. So just to let you know that 2 nights ago, there were 175 drones and 1 missile that was shot down. 90, yeah, actually, no, so that was the amount that were fired. Sorry, just remembering which way around they do these. So 176 threats were fired into Ukraine 2 nights ago. The Ukrainians shot down 91 and stopped 59 with electronic warfare, so that's 140, leaving 25 to get through. 14% beat air defense. So that's okay, considering where we've seen the interception rates of late. So gone, it seems, are the days of 0 to 5% getting through. And you're more often seeing between 10 and 20%, and then sometimes between 20 and 30%. And indeed, very rarely, we've seen like 50% as well, which is terrible. So you're seeing, 14% is actually all right compared to what the Ukrainians have experienced. Last night was interesting. It was a horrific attack last night in terms of the sheer volume of drones sent. So 264 threats, if you like, were sent in. 250 drones and 14 ballistic missiles. So interesting that we're not seeing many cruise missiles be sent. In fact, that's worth looking at. Should we look at the cruise missiles and see how many cruise missiles have been sent recently? Let's just make that a little bit smaller. I'll take my face off. And you can see that, there was a time some months ago where there were quite a lot of cruise missiles sent. Earlier on in the war, this is what we were used to. Cruise missiles just being sent very frequently. Now we don't seem to see them so much. Are they stockpiling for a massive cruise missile attack? Are they struggling to make cruise missiles? Are they finding that cruise missiles are not effective, particularly? They're easy to shoot down for the Ukrainians. I don't know. But anyway, let's go back to the stats. So 264 threats, of which 14 were ballistic missiles. Now, 98% of the attack drones were taken out, which is an incredibly successful night for the Ukrainians in terms of air defense, considering there were 250 of those bad boys sent into Ukraine. 128 shot down, 117 disabled via electronic warfare. But of course, for every one that goes up, one comes down. They cause a lot of destruction when they fall, even if you do take them out with electronic warfare, and even if you do shoot them down. 6 out of 14 Iskander ballistic missiles, by the way, is a good interception rate for ballistic missiles. I'm guessing that Patriots were busy last night near Kiev. So really heavy night. We'll go through Tim White's evening thread that went into the early morning. He stopped, I think, at 3 a.m. So explosions heard in both Kiev and Odessa. That they seem to be the two main focus areas, but really Kiev was the main one. Kiev under attack with the swarm, zigzagging drones, Odessa, a direct hit. There was also activity around Odessa yesterday during the daytime, I believe, too. The port area was struck. Now, this is an interesting bit of footage. We'll see it expanded in a second. Air defenders in Kiev spectacularly shoot down one of Russia's attack drones. I don't know. There's another. Yeah, here it is. Actually, this is it here. The moment of the fall of missile debris in Kiev. I mean, like I've said to you before, what goes up must come down, and that, I guess, you want that all burning off in the air rather than falling down, hitting the ground and then burning off. But that's an incredible bit of footage. In fact, it's been caught here in another clearer image. It shows. I mean, in some ways, some of these images are often beautiful, like the colors and the craft of the photographer. But then you realize, no, these aren't beautiful. This is absolute destruction, and it's horrific. So anyway, going back to Tim White's thread, there was. Here's his thread. There was an awful lot going on. Hard to keep track. We've probably already seen about 80 Russian long-range drones invade. So this was at, this is 12 hours ago now. So this would have been around 11:30 UK time, probably 1:30 Kiev time. Monitors predict it will be another 200 drone light, and indeed it was. Ballistic missiles launched from across the border in Bryansk. Fires in Kiev, strikes. You can see, concrete being blown up. Kiev so far. So really, really heavy night of activity. Apartment blocks on fire, particularly in the Solomyansky area of the capital. And then, he goes on and on to just detail all of these strikes as they were happening. Sorry, it's Blue Sky's not being very user-friendly there. But yeah, so all sorts of activity. Here we are, saying that, again, another 40 Russian attack drones flying over Ukraine, many over Kiev, medical treatment needed for people around that district. Previous explosions in Kiev caught on camera. Loud again, 5 mopeds diving on the city. Air defense is coping, but miraculously, there didn't seem to be too many casualties, or certainly deaths in Kiev, which is definitely good news. Indeed, someone reached out to me and said this. So this is one of my followers in Kiev at the moment, MA. Had a pretty scary night last night in Kiev. You could hear the drones flying above and little air defense. A couple of really huge explosions not far from my hotel. I'm lucky I get to leave today. Wow. Another area of Kiev that was very much under pressure was Obolon. And here again, you know, another one of these pictures that almost looks, you know, the colors are you would otherwise say, oh, beautiful sunset colors. No, it's the destruction of things burning. Awful scenes in Kiev continuing. Obolon locals say there was a direct hit on an apartment block. Definitely not debris. Parts of Ukraine's capital resemble a movie set, a nightmare caused by Russia, caused by an indicted war criminal, but facilitated by those too weak to do anything to stop it, opined Tim White as these pictures were coming in. This is the capital city in Europe tonight. 3 hours flight from London, 2 hours from Berlin. It's Kiev today. It was Georgia, Syria, Chechnya before. It will be Moldova, Estonia, maybe Finland, Germany, France, UK. Putler won't stop until he is stopped. And we're going to return to that idea a little bit later. So fires raging, you know, so much footage coming out. As Tim White said at the end, what a sickening night. Strongman Trump is a pussycat, repeatedly appeasing a war criminal. Rubio has the words but zero actions. History will judge them worse than Chamberlain because he was naive. This rabble in the White House are enabling terror. So, you know, Tim was pretty enraged as that was happening last night. And yeah, so then he said this morning, a horrendous attack on Kiev overnight, then capping off a third straight manic day. And then he updated, or is updating his thread today with all of the as the dust settles, all the damage assessment. An update from Kiev, then miraculously no one was killed, but 15 were injured in one of the biggest ever attacks on Ukraine's capital. 7 of the casualties were in the Solomyansky district. They are aged between 35 and 63. Emergency workers had to tackle a burning apartment block. And that looks like the apartment block there, hit directly by a drone. We have, what else? Yep, just all of those images that we've already seen. The main thrust of the aerial attack came in Kiev, but also Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions suffering damage. Being positive, well, there was some breathtaking photographs, as I mentioned, taken in Kiev, which may hopefully get a wide audience, particularly in the US, and that's important, actually. Odessa was also hit. The port was targeted overnight. Seems to be another breach of those loose agreement brokered by the US not to attack marine traffic. Suspiciously, there were no photos, and Russia says it hit air defense systems. Meanwhile, another of those seriously injured in yesterday's ballistics attack on Odessa has sadly died in hospital overnight, so that takes the death toll from Odessa from yesterday, ballistic missiles hitting Odessa, to 3. Interesting that the Russians claim they've hit air defense systems in Odessa. Could well be true. We don't know. And actually, we've got some evidence of quite a bit of activity in Russia as the Ukrainians also tried their hardest to degrade Russian infrastructure. But before we go on to the strikes in Russia, it's worth noting that quite a major shopping centre in Kiev was hit last night. Well-known shopping and entertainment centre in Kiev, the Blockbuster Mall in Petrivka, in the north of Ukraine's capital, suffered extensive damage. And much of the glass roof on the Blockbuster Mall in Kiev was shattered. So that's going to really hurt them commercially in Kiev. What else? So in the morning report, Russia claims all targets were hit following the sustained ballistics and drone attack. Moscow says a factory producing missiles, weapons, and attack drones, a radio technical reconnaissance center, and a Patriot anti-aircraft missile system were struck. So they are claiming a Patriot system struck, and that could well have happened. I have absolutely no way of being able to confirm that, or evidence that it didn't happen. Okay, so that's how Kiev was looking during the night. Odessa was also struck with Iskander and ballistic missiles. We had, the port structures being hit. I don't know exactly what, but it appears the port in Odessa was a target, but that could also include air defense systems. Kyiv Independent says that 13 have been killed and 51 received medical care in Ukraine in strikes over the past day. So that's right up and down the front line, all sorts of different strikes. Talking about 13 civilians dying throughout the course of the last 24 hours. It's a pretty difficult day, very difficult day day and night for the Ukrainians. Now, the Ukrainian drones themselves are striking deeper and more frequently into Russian airspace, says Tendar. Last night, the battery plant in Yelets, and in fact, that's 2 nights in a row. We don't often see that, and I've often wondered whether that should be seen more, which is striking a particular target and then striking it again, not as a kind of double tap, but you wonder whether air defense is going to be less aware, it's going to be chaos around there. They're going to be, wondering... They're going to be working very hard on trying to fix up whatever target's been hit, say an oil refinery. And I just intuitively, you think it might be more susceptible the night after to similar strikes. Or you could argue that it's less susceptible because air defense are going to be more ready. Or I don't know. But anyway, this happened with Yelets, a battery plant in Yelets in Lipetsk region being struck 2 nights in a row. Russian channels reported that due to drone threats, the airports all the way to Ivanovo, Nizhny Novgorod, Yaroslav, and even Kostroma had to be closed. Overall air travel in at least 15 Russian regions, this is from 2 nights ago, including Moscow, were disrupted due to increased drone activity. Okay, so the major point is there's actually been 3 or 4 nights now of really significant Ukrainian strikes into Russia, and they're going deeper, more consistently. But we just don't know, like I've said the last 2 days, what the real damage that's been done or hopefully has been done is. So we know from last night, Novomoskovsk, the Azot plant has been hit. Now, this is a chemical plant, attack on acid tanks and methanol, an M300 production unit. Gritsovo, Prokhorovka and Orlovka villages have had full evacuations ordered around that chemical plant. So No Report says day 4 of drone strikes overnight. Another wave of drones slammed into Russian territory. Moscow says 94 were shot down, but reports speak of explosions near Yelets. So that's one, as he says here, already hit recently. Actually, it's the night before, I think. And the NAK Azot chemical plant in Novomakovsk in Tula region was hit, and there's visual evidence of that being hit. So drones targeted Russia's largest ammonia and nitrogen fertilizer producer, undermining the war economy and military applications. The strike hit the NAK Azot chemical plant there, as mentioned, and damaged a natural gas pipeline. So you can see some effects of the strikes. White smoke coming up quite a bit over there. So definitely some damage done by the Ukrainians last night. And here we have Yelets. The second night it's been hit. Overnight drones damaged a plant producing chemical power sources in Yelets, Russia. The plant was targeted for the second night in a row. The energy plant serves, I think this is Energia. This is the Energia plant, that's what it's called. Serves as Russia's sole manufacturer of batteries for aviation bomb guidance systems and produces power sources for Iskander missiles. It's exactly the sort of plant you want to be hitting. And personally, I'd be hitting that again. Russian chemical plant, missile parts manufacturer targeted. So a factory in Lipetsk Oblast making missile parts, and a chemical plant in Tula. So that's basically what we know. But since the Russians are claiming sort of almost 100 drones were taken out, it could well be that other places were targeted too. I'd assume so. Now, quite a bit to go through on the other bits and pieces section here. We've already been going over half an hour. So, Russia has enough manpower and metal to sustain its war effort for at least 2 more years, says the US European Command Chief General Christopher Cavoli. Despite heavy losses, Moscow retains the capacity to continue the fight at its current pace. So that's really worrying that they can keep doing this for another 2 years. What are Ukraine able to do in response? Interesting piece in the Telegraph where they get a bit tactical. Russia is employing a triple chokehold tactic on the battlefield. Ground assaults pin Ukrainian forces, drones block retreats, and glide bombs wipe out defences, forcing defenders to choose between high losses or exposure to drone strikes, according to the Telegraph. And they have indeed quite a few images in there to support that and help you understand it. So the 3-step Russian tactic driving back Ukraine is the Telegraph's latest piece on the war there. Now, Andrew sort of has quite a long thread. We're going to go through this. Andrew Perpetua. Ukraine does not have an adequate air force, but it can create the effects of an air force using other methods and tools. For example, long-range drones can be deployed in a series of nested concentric circles to mine and harass supply roads, effectively cutting them off. One layer of drones could strike targets 100 kilometers out, the next at 80 kilometers, then 60 and 40, and finally the remaining drones could dominate at the last 20 to 30 kilometers leading to the front. With sufficient drone coverage density, the impact on enemy logistics can closely mirror that of a conventional air force, cutting off supplies and limiting troop movements. This is a really good point. So what you would use your air supremacy to do is just absolutely hammer the crap out of the enemy going back to 100 kilometers so that they couldn't supply the front line. They can't get troops, can't get supplies to the front line, that their logistics as well as their troops themselves are completely, and materiel are completely hammered. And you do that by just having overwhelming air superiority so that you can just with impunity use your air force to strike A-10 Warthog bombers to just flatten these areas. Well, you can have that kind of effect by using drones, argues Andrew Perpetua, in a systematic way. Furthermore, the development of heavier strike so with sufficient drone density, the impact on enemy logistics can closely mirror that of a conventional air force, cutting off supplies and limiting troop movements, to repeat. Furthermore, the development of heavier strike drones with payloads between 100 and 500 kilograms can replicate the effects of traditional airstrikes in conjunction with attack drones. This combination becomes a deadly 1-2 punch. Attack drones locate and relay target positions. Heavier strike drones follow up with rapid and destructive precision. Once the enemy's rear positions are degraded to this extent, the front becomes unsustainable. The opposing force will be forced to withdraw regardless of intent. Ukraine does not need large offensive pushes to defeat Russia. It needs extremely high density drone coverage to deny Russian sustainment. Land can be taken back piece by piece without committing to large and costly ground assaults. This is interesting, and I like his thinking here. All but the heavy drone strikes can be done with the technology that Ukraine has available today, right now. The strike drones could be developed in short order. This is a realistic path to victory using the tools and resources available, and one which Europe could help using financing alone. Europe could also provide longer range weapons for Ukraine's existing aircraft, which is frankly a much more unrealistic path forward, albeit possible. And Europe doesn't really have the weapons available to give, so would require making them first. But the point here is simple. Ukraine does not need to physically push Russia back to win. This is kind of in response to, I think, Zaluzhny's point yesterday. They never needed to do that. Trying to do that was stupid. There are smarter ways. Ukraine doesn't need to fight Russia's war. Russia's war, the way that Russia do things. They can change the rules and fight on their own terms. That is a really good thread from Andrew, and I like his thinking. That's exactly what they need to do. Like I said before, they need to fight this war from, it's a distance munition war. And that's drones, missiles, drones and missiles. That's what I've said for well over 2 years now. And Andrew there, absolutely on point as far as I'm concerned. A French TV channel, BFM, has managed to film a video story, this breaks my heart, in occupied Mariupol called, quote, "I want to become an FSB agent. Russification of the young generation is underway in Mariupol." So that is to say that brainwashing is working. Journalists showed the last bell in one of the local schools where school children stand to the Russian anthem and then carry a giant tricolor flag. The military is also present at the assembly, handing out diplomas to the children. One of the children says that in the future he wants to become an FSB agent to catch terrorists. It's really, really heartbreaking, that. Right, Sergei Lavrov said that after the 1,000 for 1,000 prisoners exchange is completed, Russia will hand over to Ukraine a document setting out the conditions for achieving a sustainable long-term settlement agreement. So Ukraine has agreed to an unconditional ceasefire. Russia keeps coming up with new conditions. But on this POW swap, 1,000 POWs have been swapped over 3 days. So yesterday, 390 Ukrainians returned from Russian captivity under the Istanbul agreements. Military and civilians, men and women, each one of them is ours, says Rustem Omarov, the defense minister. The only goal in forming the lists was to save lives. We expect new exchanges in the coming days. So 390 there, and it was lovely to see this, which is, yeah, of course there's going to be music, which is a welcome home to the Ukrainian POWs traveling in the buses back to their families, their friends and families, and just being welcomed on the side of the road by locals who are very happy to see them and giving them the justified welcome. Then we hear, talking of POWs, that there are over 150 cases of Russia executing POWs. Remember, CNN yesterday came out with intercepts of Russian commanders saying, yep, keep the commander, kill all the rest. That kind of thing. There are, I think, 6 intercepts of Russians, therefore systematically ordering the murder of Ukrainian POWs. Shoot them on the spot. Ukraine's military intelligence records over 150 cases of Russians executing POWs. The agency noted that this figure includes those cases recorded by the HUR, suggesting the actual total may be higher. And we also hear that Ukraine has detained 6 suspected Russian agents, including a teen arsonist. The SBU security service says suspects were recruited via Telegram and ordered to target railway and military infrastructure. This is a real issue. So my opinion, and I shouldn't be giving Russia ideas, but of course they would have thought about this and they're doing it. If let's imagine a cruise missile costs $1 million or something. Let's just assume that. Just plucking a random number. Now, $1 million for a cruise missile, or $1 million spent bribing Ukrainians to cause trouble, when each one of these can be done, or you spend that money on blackmailing, on entrapping these people and getting them to do things. I think you would get way more return on investment from $1 million spent this way than spent on a missile and sending it. Honestly, I just think this is easy money for the Russians to spend, and in fact the Ukrainians are doing that too. Here we see that money spent in the wider European theatre. UK government is probing possible Russian involvement in arson attacks targeting our Prime Minister, according to the Financial Times. 2 Ukrainian nationals, frustratingly, Roman Lavrinovich and Petro Pochinok, and a Romanian national, Stanislav Karpiuk, have been charged with conspiracy to commit arson with intent to endanger life. So that's our Prime Minister's properties and a car, I think, were targeted by these people. And Russian-led cybercrime network has been dismantled in a global operation. This is really good news. So arrest warrants have been issued for ringleaders after an investigation by police in Europe, and loads of nations were involved in this, and North America. So you've got British, Canadian, Dutch, Danish, French, German, and US police. Indictments have been unsealed in the US against 16 individuals, and international arrest warrants issued for 20, I presume, other suspects, most of them living in Russia, though. Those charged include the alleged leaders of the Quackbot and Danabot malware operations, including, and it goes through some details there. So these are cyber attacks aimed at destabilizing governments or simple theft and blackmail, and becoming increasingly pernicious. High street retailer in the UK, Marks and Spencer's, a famous famous shop, is one of the most high-profile and recent victims of the UK this month. We've also got a real issue with Co-op. I think they were hacked, but I don't know if that was through Russian cybercrime. But anyway, it really good that there's this unity working against this Russian approach, even though we are hearing that the US is dialing back its cyber attack and cyber defense, in combating Russia. Don't know why they'd be doing that, considering this activity is taking place. So it's really good news that a successful conclusion has come about in dismantling a particular global operation with the Russians at the heart of it. We've got anecdotes here. A Russian commander scammed his own soldiers and the Z volunteers. He stole the humanitarian aid instead of giving it to the troops. Now the soldiers have nothing, and the angry volunteers say they won't help that regiment anymore. So it becomes counterproductive. You can go and read this at your leisure. I'm actually going to move on because it's been a long video already. We have the EU's considering cutting more than 20 banks from the SWIFT network, that's international payment system, as well as lowering the price cap on Russian oil and banning the Nord Stream gas pipelines as part of a new sanctions package. That'll be the next one. Major Russian exporters, including Rusal and Gazprom Neft, have cut their planned volume of commodities like metal and oil products they're sending by rail. It has already planned to spend 40% less on investment this year than in 2024 in the face of soaring interest payment costs. The state-owned rail monopoly intends to reduce 2025 spending by an additional 32.5 billion rubles, $408 million, or around 3.5% due to revised cargo forecasts. So one way of understanding the impact of this war on the Russian economy is to look at the Russian railways, which is how they move stuff around necessarily, because it's such a big country. The rail is the key to the Russian economy. And if the Russian railway is suffering, then the economy is suffering. Now, good news talking about sanctions is that there's an 82nd senator has joined the bipartisan bill started by Lindsey Graham to impose hard-hitting sanctions on Russia. So it's got 82 co-sponsors across both parties in the Senate. So that's really good news. Now, I was reporting on this yesterday, speculating on this, saying I think Marco Rubio is saying one thing in public, but actually trying to get the senators to put that bill through, because he knows that's the only way of getting action against Russia taking place from the US administration, given that the people at the top of the bill are compromised. And so it's up to Congress to do something about this. So this is now what's being reported here. Secretary Rubio pushes Lindsey Graham's bill for tough sanctions and 500% tariffs on countries buying from Russia on condition of anonymity, a source close to Rubio said. Notice how Rubio brings up the topic of sanctions almost every day. He wants Congress to push Graham's bill because it has a majority in the Senate and cannot be vetoed. That would destroy any attempt to reset relations with Moscow. So that's kind of what I was discussing yesterday. The Pentagon is likely to downgrade a policy office instrumental in the military's response to the war in Ukraine, according to Defense News. So, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. Rubio is trying to get Senate to do something because everywhere else the government is trying to stop support for Ukraine. The office that's being downgraded has helped shape US policy towards a war and manage a vast sum of military aid sent to help support its self-defense. As part of a larger reshuffle of the Pentagon's policy apparatus, the office dedicated to Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia affairs would be shifted under a separate office that handles Europe and NATO issues, the sources said. So it's just a kind of demoting the importance of Ukraine. And then you hear this. 3 people, this is coming from the Financial Times, 3 people familiar with the dismissals said Ivan Kanapathy, National Security, a senior director for the National Security Council, senior director for Asia, remained, but his entire team, including his China staff, had been let go. They're like purging national security staff. I mean, Laura Loomer already had her way with a number of them. Now we've got an entire Asia and China staff being purged, being sacked. What is going on? And I kind of agree with this from the opinion piece in the Washington Post. The sad truth is that peace in Ukraine is probably more distant today than when Trump took office. Trump had been president, had been president just 3 weeks, and he had already played his biggest Ukraine negotiating card, ending the isolation of Putin. Unless Trump finally delivers on his threats, he has folded his hand on what could be the most damaging failure of his presidency. Yeah, and then this kind of along the same lines. This is coming from Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who used to be Russia's richest man. He's now a dissident. The amount of naivety in the West is staggering, says Tendar. When it comes to dealing with Russia, the majority of Russians live their whole life by pushing others. It starts from childhood, permeates in every aspect of their lives, and never ends. If you don't push back, they will push you all eternity. Pushing back is no escalation. It's necessary. Sanctions are good, but they're not enough, let alone talks. You won't convince Russians to make peace. You have to make them. And this point is made by Khodorkovsky. Let's read through what he says here. In some speech recently, he says, a lot of smart people have been thinking for 3 years how to resist Putin's war machine. And now, I'm always fascinated when people refuse to accept the simple answer. Military force can only be countered by military force. That's it, period. Quote, but maybe we can do something that with balloons and flashlights. With balloons and flashlights, only with military force. But maybe somehow with flowers. You can't do it with flowers, only with military force. Maybe we can do it with some super sanctions. We'll ban them from buying coats, ban them from buying Louis Vuitton bags. Maybe that's how we can stop the tanks. No, you can't stop tanks that way. Tanks can only be stopped by military force. Sorry, I don't have another answer for you. So his view is that all of these other options that are being presented to stop Russia are pointless. You've got to stop them militarily. You've got to push them back. And that's where the West needs to come in and stand up. I would argue actually that sanctions are super important, but you've got to go the whole hog with the sanctions. And that's why the US needs to be involved. Anyway, that's been a long one from me. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your support. I've combined a lot into this because I'm going to be less able to do lots of videos today. I'm shooting off tomorrow for a couple of days. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.